Hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Bristol Law Society to today's webinar. My name is Coralie McIver, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Honorary Secretary at Bristol Law Society, and I also co-chair the ED&I committee. I'm delighted to have Saida Bello talk for us today, and she's covering the topic of how to develop your equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. And I'll hand over to her shortly. Just as a reminder to everyone who, and in case you haven't attended one of our webinars before, we do record these sessions. So the session will be recorded and you will get a link to the recording on YouTube after the session. Saida will also be sharing her slides with the attendees as well. So you will get a copy of the slides from the presentation. I'd also just like to remind you about two events we have coming up next week. We've got a business interruption webinar on the 26th of January, and we've got an apprenticeship webinar on the 27th of January. So hopefully you or one of your colleagues may be able to join us for those as well. We also have a Q&A function for this session. We're going to do the Q&A at the end, but please feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A throughout the session, and we'll pick those up at the end. And I'll now hand over to Saida. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this lunchtime webinar today. I hope you are nice and relaxed with your sandwiches and a cup of tea. It's quite a cold day out there. So thank you very much for deciding to join me today to talk about developing your diversity and inclusion strategy. So I'm going to start off with introduction, just to tell you about my background, what I do on a day-to-day basis. So my name is Saida Bello, and I am one of the current directors of Bristol Law Society. In my day job, I am a housing solicitor and I work for Bristol City Council. So I've been working for Bristol for about 4 years now. Prior to that, I worked for Camden Council for about 5 years, also worked for Birmingham for about 2 years, and also for the Peabody Housing Trust in London. So I think I've got about 15 years experience as a housing solicitor. More recently, I've done a lot of diversity and inclusion work. I started off doing EDI work for Bristol City Council. Firstly, my capacity as the chair of the Black and Minority Ethnic group, the BAME. I'm going to refer to it as BAME to make it easier. So I started off chairing the BAME network for about 2.5 years at Bristol City Council. And that's where I got the opportunity to do some EDI work. The council has been really taking a leadership role in terms of EDI in the city. As part of that, I have fed into the development of the EDI strategy at Bristol City Council. I've also participated in the council and indeed the citywide Stepping Up programme, which is a positive action and diverse leadership programme. And I was I'm an alumni of that programme, and I participated in 2018. So I'll be happy to speak to you briefly about that experience as well. Over the last 12 months, I have been on secondment to the Office for Students, also based in Bristol. They're the regulators of higher education in England and Wales. So that's really given me an opportunity to lead on the internal EDI work at the Office for Students, which I refer to as the OFS. So really the purpose of this webinar today is to share with you some of my experiences doing EDI work over the last 4 years, both at the City Council and, in my role as EDI advisor at the OFS in the last sort of 12 months. So that's just a little bit about myself. Like Coralie said, we're going to leave time for questions and answers at the end. So I only intend to speak for about 35 minutes, and then we can leave the remaining of time for me to take some of your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to proceed to the next slide. So your D&I strategy roadmap, that's what we're here to talk about today. But we thought to kick us off, we really wanted to do a little bit of audience participation and use this opportunity to find out from you about what your organization is currently doing with regards to EDI, and more specifically, where are you in your EDI journeys. So we do have a poll where we're going to be asking, we're going to be really looking at whether or not you've got an EDI strategy, your policy, and if not, perhaps maybe an EDI statement that you use in terms of recruitment. So thank you, Claire. My colleague Claire has put that there. And if I can ask you to please share your responses. Okay, I can see the poll is still going, so leave it for a few more seconds. Okay. Right, I think, yeah, we've got all the responses we're going to get there. So looking at the results, it looks like we've got majority of people who are participating. 73% of you do have an EDI strategy in place. In terms of action plans, then about 55% have voted that they've got that in place. And in terms of recruitment, the numbers are definitely higher, so 86%. I think most organizations do have that statement that they use in terms of recruitment, which is really, really good to see. So thank you very much for that. I don't know if I need to press share results. Yeah, is that all right? So I just want to, I'm going to stop sharing the results there and get rid of the polling. Great. So no, it's really, really useful. I think, like I said, the starting point is just to always realize with diversity and inclusion that every organization is in a different stage in terms of their journey, and it's really important to do that sort of self-audit or reflection into your particular organization just to determine where you are at the moment. So thank you very much for participation. So on to the next slide. Okay, so in the next slide, and I do realize that, you know, quite a few of the audience are from different organizations. We've got a mix of public, private sector organizations in the audience today. What I've done is, because we are being hosted by the Bristol Law Society, what I've done is looked at some of our data in the legal profession, and in particular, our annual statistics reports. And I have to say that really, really proud of the Law Society, because we do have a lot of rich data that we've been collecting over the last 30 years. And I do remember back in 1997 when I joined as a student member, and I studied at UWE in Bristol here, that in terms of, you know, diversity, particularly ethnic diversity, which I would have looked at as a student at the time, the profession wasn't faring as well. And, you know, really pleased to see that 24 years later, a lot of work has been done by the Law Society in terms of, you know, diversifying. So if you look at our ASR report 2019 and looking at the trends, so what I've done is I've, with the permission from the Law Society, I've extracted that information and put it into my own table But if you look at that, it's, like I said, it's very, very positive. So if you look at our data ending 31st of July 2018, you can see that in terms of the number of solicitors on the roll and also solicitors with a practicing certificate, you see that in terms of the variance, the numbers and the trends are really upwards. So we're doing very well as a profession. If you look at gender diversity as well, so women solicitors with practicing certificates, numbers going up from 72,000 to 75,000, plus 4.2%. And also with respect to ethnic minority groups as well, again, that is on the increase. So on the face of it, the data, like I said, looks very good, and the trend is definitely upwards. So onwards to the next slides. What I've tried to do is just set out some of the highlights. Like I said, it's very positive. Profession is doing well. We're clearly in demand as a profession. I know that not all of you today are solicitors, but just using this as an example. What I wanted to illustrate with the data that, okay, sometimes when you receive data as well, it does look like, okay, there's a lot of good news, the data is improving, but sometimes you do need to dig a little bit deeper and interrogate the data a little bit. So I'm just going to focus on BAME groups, and at the moment we're recording 17.5%. As a share of all solicitors in total. And if you consider the fact that in the population, in the working population at least, there are only 13.4% of BAME solicitors, then you think that, okay, this is a really, really great figure. If you look close at the data though, and apply an EDI lens, some of the things that for me are missing in the data at the moment is this particular report that I refer to. We don't have any information about LGBT or disability. And that is not to say that as a profession, we're not collecting that data, because I have been in touch with the Law Society, and clearly we do have that data. It's just not in this particular report. So what I'll be looking at when I see an annual statistics report like this is looking for diversity from all sorts of protected groups. In terms of ethnicity as well, I've given you that sort of headline figure of 17.5%. However, what that data doesn't tell us is the level in the organizations that those that ethnicity is actually present in organizations. So what we know for fact, and from another report that I've shared with you today, is that at senior levels and also at partnership levels, the representation is actually very low. Another thing that we could pick up in the data is the fact that this term that I'm mentioning, and I'm using this term myself today as well, and I know that some people are really critical of that term, the term BAME. And what the term BAME does, and the reason people have been critical about it, is that it doesn't separate different ethnic minority groups. And when we look at the data, you can see that there is a little bit of a difference in the data, and there's a difference between how various ethnic minority groups are faring. And I think we'll look at that in one of my later slides. The other sort of gaps that we can see in the data is in terms of gender diversity. Again, I said that above that, okay, women now outnumber men by 4,500, and that is really good compared to when I started in the profession, I think 24 years ago. However, in terms of representation, and especially in the senior roles, you find that that figure in terms of representation for women is also quite low. We're not up to 50-50 representation yet. So whilst the diversity is increasing, we do need to ask more questions, and we do need to interrogate the data and really ask more questions so that we know what sort of initiatives that we can introduce. So on to my next slide, and I really wanted to have a look at this slide just to give you an example, because I do appreciate that not all of you here today are from the legal profession, but I just wanted to use this as an illustration just to show you that in terms of the breakdown of that word BAME, this is what we have in our latest statistics. So like I've mentioned before, we've got 17.5% as a headline figures, and that is, BAME solicitors as a percentage of solicitors. But if you look closely at the data, then you can see that with African Caribbean solicitors, we've got 1250 on the roll. With African background, 2,892. So if you add those two figures together, you find that the number of solicitors from an Asian background is actually 3 times more than African Caribbean and African solicitors put together. So if we then accept the 17.5% figure, the headline figure, it doesn't give us that opportunity to find out what is going on and the representation for each of those groups that set out in this table. So I just use that as an illustration to show you the reason why, from a D&I perspective, we may want to question data, and we may want to speak to our data analysts in our organizations. And I say that because, just because you're leading on EDI doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in every single area. So I'm not a data expert myself, but what you do is when you collaborate in the EDI space, you get to work with different professionals. So I work with HR professionals, I've worked with data analysts and people who can actually help you break down the data and get the information that you want. So don't feel by any means that you have to do everything yourself. You work closely with them professionals who can highlight the sort of gaps that you see in the data. So on to my next slide, which is really, now getting to the meat of the conversation, why we're here today, and really talking about you as an organization developing your EDI strategy. And even if you do, like we said, 73% of you already have an EDI strategy, what I'm sure you would appreciate is that in terms of strategy, whether it's your corporate plans, EDI or other strategy, this is a document that you have to keep under review, and at least on an annual basis, you'll be reporting on your strategy, you'll be making sure that you're heading in the right direction. So I think regardless of where you are in your journeys, there's always that need to keep scanning the horizon and keep improving and keep collaborating with other organizations. But I think a good thing to do is, when even if you're amending your policy and developing it, is always start with why, and look at, when you do your PESTLE analysis and you look at your external and internal environments and look at the reasons, the drivers of change in your organization. Last year, for example, we had many drivers for change, not least the current pandemic, which we're still in now. I think we're in our 3rd national lockdown. So many things happened last year, from the BLM, the Black Lives Matter protests, to the sort of socio-economic inequalities that we were reminded of following the pandemic, which obviously we're still in. So those are really reasons that you keep thinking about when developing and improving your strategy. But also, I think it's equally as important to look at your organization or your corporate plans, your business plans for those of you working in smaller organizations, and looking at what your objectives are and what you're trying to achieve as an organization, thinking about your corporate social responsibilities, the communities that you serve, looking at who are your clients and what are the expectations of you as an organization, and really linking those objectives with your EDI strategy. I think that's really important. We already know about the financial benefits of having diversity of thinking in your organization. But I think a really good book that I would recommend, I read a couple of weeks ago, is Rebel Ideas and the Power of Diverse Thinking. That's the full title of that book, and it's by Matthew Said. And, you know, it's really a book that looks at diversity of thought in different sectors and in different contexts. I mean, the book starts with looking at the CIA and September the 11th and the gaps that were in their intelligence for September the 11th as a result of not having diverse workforce in the CIA at the time. And from reading the book, you can understand why they've decided to look into that and really diversify their workforce. But I think it's a really interesting read. It looks at different sectors, but really makes the point for diversity of thought and really having a diverse workforce. But like I said, there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of evidence base. You know, the McKinsey reports 2015, 2018. Another one was issued last year called Diversity Wins, Why Inclusion Matters. That's the full title of that report. But, you know, worth having a look at that report and really understanding the benefits for your organization of having diversity of thought and a diverse workforce. I've also said, you know, why now, you know, and I've mentioned BLM protests, the COVID-19 pandemic, but also we mustn't forget the impact of this 3 national lockdowns that we've had so far on your employees. You know, I'm an employee myself, so I know that it's been a huge impact in terms of health and well-being. And then for some of us, like myself, who are homeschooling, it continues to be such a challenge. I'm actually homeschooling an 11-year-old and 12-year-old, and then trying to work full-time as well. So, you know, your employees, your colleagues will also be under, some of them will be under those same sort of pressures. So these are good reasons for you to really look at your EDI strategies and look at how you can support people so that you'll be able to better retain people in your organization. So on to my next slide. I really like this slide because this is a question that quite a few employers and colleagues, you know, ask me time and again in different webinars that I've presented, and that's the difference between diversity and inclusion. So I don't know if you've heard this quote before, but a really popular quote, and I don't know who has said it, who it's accredited to, but they say that diversity is like being invited to the party, whilst inclusion is like being asked to dance. So I'm sure many of us, we can think of past experiences when, you know, you've been out at a party and you just kept waiting and waiting for that particular person to ask you to dance. And, you know, if you didn't get asked to dance, you know, how sad that must have been. And, you know, that feeling that you would have had. So this is how we can easily distinguish between inclusion and diversity. So on the left-hand side, really, diversity is really the basics and the starting off points, you know, where you're looking at your workforce data, you know, how representative is it? How high are your disclosure rates in terms of underrepresented groups, LGBT, disability, BAME, gender, you know, religion? There could be other groups as well in your organization. And also when you're, you know, an organization that cares about diversity, you start to look at the representation in your workforce, but also representing your local demographic area and also the clients, your clientele that you're serving. And organizations who are, you know, already starting to go on this journey would have something like perhaps annual data reporting. But what they might find is that despite, you know, starting this initial work, the data doesn't really improve in terms of, you know, they're not able to diversify their workforce, and they're not really making that notable changes in terms of data. So, you know, a better position to be in would be on the right-hand side of the table, which is, you know, to be more inclusive as an organization. And an inclusive organization would really start making huge attempts to engage with its staff. So in terms of staff networks, making sure that staff networks are available for employees who want to get that started, Also having annual staff surveys. So both organizations that I've worked for, both Bristol City Council, the OFS, they have annual staff surveys, and they have things like pulse surveys where they're always constantly engaging with their employees and finding out how they are. Good organizations also that are inclusive would have up-to-date HR people policies so that they know what their staff need in order to work effectively. So for example, now in the pandemic, flexible working policy is very, very important. Also, health and well-being policies, very, very important, because we want to make sure that in the current situation that we're in, or working from home, we want to make sure people are still exercising, looking after their mental health and well-being. Those looking after children are, giving that sort of leave to be able to also fulfill their parental responsibilities as well. It's equally as important, though, for inclusive organization to have a good communication strategy so that you are sharing with your employees what you're doing internally in terms of inclusion and diversity. But I think also like to mention that in terms of belonging, which is something that's really, really very topical at the moment, the best organizations would really think of ways that they can make their employees feel like a valued part of their organization, really give the employees that feeling that they want to actually come to work and work for that organization. So on to the next slide. Again, I wanted to use the example of the Law Society and a report that we published, that the Law Society published in December 2020. That report, although it focuses on the experiences of BAME solicitors, I really like the report because the recommendations actually could be applied to any or all of the underrepresented groups rather than just BAME. Like I said before, the Law Society, we're really fortunate. We've had our annual statistics reports for about 30 years or so, but this particular report, I recommend reading it. It is on the Law Society website, or you can ping me a message. I can send that to you, or anybody in the Bristol Law Society can ping this over. But it uses primary research as well. So the Law Society conducted about 17 roundtables where they spoke to people and really listened to voices and people with lived experience of BAME issues. And I think that's really, really important in the EDI space as well, rather than just reading your diversity reports from consultants, McKinsey, Forbes, etc. What you really need to do is engage directly with your members of staff and actually organize and facilitate things like focus groups, roundtables like the Law Society has done, because the data is, directly, it's what we call, primary research and qualitative data from the source, and it tends to be really richer information. The report's also a really good one to read because there's a lot of critical thinking applied. And one of the examples is what I mentioned before, the use of the term BAME. And we know that our figures, we're doing really well compared to the working population, which is about 13%. In the Law Society, we've got 17%. But actually, what about if you break that data down, you see that there is like a difference depending on the ethnic groups that you're looking at. And it's not to say that we want to distinguish between different ethnic groups, but what we would like ideally from an EDI lens is for all the different groups to be performing really well. So that's what that is about. And then the Law Society report also highlights that in terms of senior leadership and partner level roles, there's a lot of work that we still need to do as a profession in terms of gender equality and also ethnic equalities. So that really shows us that we have work to do, but by continuously interviewing, speaking to our members, we can actually get information about the work that needs to be done. like I said, the reason I do like this report is that the recommendations, which I'm going to get onto to some of them in my next slide, those recommendations can apply to different organizations. It's not just for the legal profession, but all of you who are here listening today will benefit from reading this report. Another reason that I wanted to mention today is that intersectionality, if you as an organization want to be at the cutting edge in terms of EDI, then one of the concepts at the moment, the topical concepts, is intersectionality. And that really talks about the interconnected nature of protected groups. So, and this is the idea that really you can't put members of your staff or people into a box, and you can't say, okay, this person is a BAME person, so this person, is a Muslim, or so you can't really do that, because actually in practice we find that people actually fall under multiple protected characteristic groups, and then you have to actually consider that fact in order to make good decisions about the EDI that you implement in your organization. So intersectionality is one of the key principles that I would recommend if you're not really looking at your data from that lens, from the lens that people really are a part of several of these groups, and that would impact the sort of work that you have to do as an organization. Right, so in terms of that report, very, very quickly, just to say that, it's a great report. Like I said, they do set out the recommendations under 4 different categories. What can we do at entry level, retention, development, progression? What can we do in terms of increasing inclusion, and also data and evaluation? So I've set out, an example of each there. And I thought the first one's really interesting, because at the entry level, I think most organizations, you ask for people's diversity data at the start, but sometimes we don't follow up on that information. But it's really important not just to measure representation at the entry level, but also look at it in terms of your organization. Who is getting the career progression? Who is, what's the retention rate compared to underrepresented groups, and also majority groups as well, comparing those retention rates. And also, when people leave your organization, do you carry out a survey, an exit survey, to find out reasons why they're leaving the organization? Recruitment is really, really expensive for organizations. So if people are leaving your organization, you want to find out why that is and really learn from that information. In terms of retention, progression, developing your employees as well, in the reports by the Law Society, they've recommended things like mentoring programs. Like I said at the start, I was part of the Bristol City Council Positive Action Diverse Leadership Programme. So that's another thing that organisations can do in terms of retention, development and progression of staff. In terms of inclusion as well, I mentioned before the difference between diversity and inclusion, and organizations that are really focusing on inclusion will ensure that they have a sponsor for underrepresented groups. So in the Law Society reports, because it was about race, they've said have a senior level sponsor for race. Well, really, ideally, like I said, you can have a sponsor for all underrepresented groups. So these recommendations apply for across all the protected characteristic groups. Equally as important in EDI work is data, looking at the data just as we did at the start, taking you through the Law Society's data, but also evaluation of any sort of initiatives that you do introduce as an organization. So it's important to be led by the data, looking at each particular organization's data, but then using that data to identify the problem areas and then design your interventions for that organization. So for me, for example, working for Bristol City Council, and the issues we had in that organization will be different from when I'm working in another organization. You'd really need to start afresh, look at that organization's data, and you wouldn't recommend those same initiatives necessarily for another organization. So really look at your individual data and be led by data. And also remember that once you're introducing initiatives, colleagues in your organization and the leadership team will rightly ask you, what's the outcome of these initiatives? And, so I'll use the Stepping Up program as an example. So on the Stepping Up program, my cohort in 2018, we found that once that was evaluated, I think about almost 70% of the people who've been on that program actually got better jobs within a year of attending on Stepping Up. So that sort of, evidence-based and evaluation strengthens the attractiveness of that program for employers and people who want to invest in those sorts of programs. So in terms of my big giveaway today, and the big takeaway for you today is really looking at your EDI journey as a roadmap. And on the left-hand side, I've really talked about theories, the theory of change and theory of implementing change in organizations and how you can structure that. But more importantly, on the right-hand side, I've really listed the sort of initiatives that I have been involved with in the last 4 years, working with organizations on EDI, which is, things like developing and keeping up to date on an annual basis their EDI strategy, not just the EDI strategy, but also a clear action plan, a list of the things that you can do as an organization to really push forward your EDI journeys. It's really important that you get your leadership team involved, and all the organizations I've worked, at CEO levels, they've been involved, and that does make the difference, because if other managers see that, the senior leaders in the organizations are taking an interest, then they also take an interest. So I think leadership is always key with the EDI work. Communications, I put that in bold, as you can see, because like I said before, it is important to share this information about the initiatives you're introducing on your EDI web pages, blog about it, have an EDI calendar where you celebrate diversity dates, etc. My fourth point is about having an EDI governance structure and accountability. And really, whoever's the EDI lead in an organization, not really doing everything themselves, but actually really inviting other colleagues to sit on a steering group with them. So that's, my experience. I've worked with HR, I've worked with data analysts, I've worked with learning and development colleagues on the committee to make sure that we can actually, push forward our EDI work. Monitoring, having annual reports, and also working with your staff networks, looking at your data and being led by data are equally as important. So have a look at, I'm conscious of time and I do want to get to questions, but I would say have a look at this roadmap. And even if you do have your strategy, if you're looking to develop, there might be gaps at the moment. So have a look at that and feel free to ping me a message or have a discussion about that. I have put in the blue boxes as well, in particular, the first one, values and behaviors, is something that I've personally found really, really helpful in the EDI work that I've done. And I found that organizations with values and behaviors, it's very, very useful to have like that narrative of how people expect to be treated and how the organization expect colleagues to treat one another. So that is something that I always advocate for. So I want to finish off by just saying that, the Bristol Law Society, we're doing our part as well. In the last, I think it was December, when we introduced our ED&I committee, which we're establishing at the moment, working with various law firms in the area. But we've had a really supportive president, Ben Holt, and our past presidents as well, Nicholas Lee, who've supported us in terms of EDI. And I'm really, really pleased to say that, you know, now that we've set up this EDI committee, my colleague Coralie and Salma Maksud will be leading on this to make sure that we collaborate with you as our members and, you know, make sure that we continue to increase the number of solicitors from underrepresented groups, from all underrepresented groups in the Southwest area. So please do get in touch with us to see how we can collaborate. So in terms of, instead of a conclusion today, what I've got for you is a call to action, really for everyone who's on this call and anyone else who may listen to this webinar later, to really reflect, as we've done at the start of this webinar, look at the level that your organization is at the moment. You know, you could be at level 1 where you're just introducing a new change map, or you could be at level 2 where you're already, you know, looking at your diversity data and you know the composition of your workforce. But then perhaps what you need to do next is interrogate the data and see which areas that you need to work on. Or perhaps you could be a level 3 organization where you're just moving from diversity and doing all that diversity work to inclusion, where you're now beginning to organize and introduce staff networks and your staff surveys, your pulse surveys to really better engage your organization. And then lastly, you could be a really highly advanced organization that, you know, you're really at belonging stage, where you've created this atmosphere and feeling of belonging for your employees. And what I would say to organizations at level 4 and all the other levels, that this is our opportunity to collaborate and work together and achieve results in the EDI space in Bristol. So we're going to move on to Q&A now, and really want to thank you all again for joining us for this lunchtime webinar, and looking forward to answering some of your questions. Over to you, Coralie.
Thank you. So I think I will just start with a nice simple question. Claire Davies asked, is the annual report for England and Wales qualified solicitors or the whole of the UK?
Sorry, Coralie, could you repeat that? So I did catch your question there.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's just for the annual report,
okay,
that you talked about at the beginning of the session. Claire Davies asked if it was for England and Wales qualified solicitors or for the whole of the UK.
England and Wales, yeah, England and Wales, that report.
Yeah, and then the next question I have was, for smaller organizations which have more stretched resource, what fundamentals do you think a small organization can prioritize putting in place to have a positive impact on their workforce under ED&I?
Okay. I think in terms of small organizations, recruitment is, you know, one area that I think most organizations, we all have to recruit. So it's an area where we can work on. And yeah, various organizations, there have been various reports published about best practice in recruitment. So I was quite lucky that at Bristol City Council, we had like an 18-month project looking at our recruitment policy, where we reviewed our policies and really tested the policy, changed our training with our organization. And also I have, you know, helped run a similar project at the Office for Students, where we've again looked at our current recruitment policy and looked at best practice externally, and looked at things that we can do, initiatives that we can introduce. So for example, at Bristol, we've got diverse recruitment panels, so that we make sure that we've got somebody who's been trained in recruitment on panels. And yeah, it's those sorts of initiatives. I think most organizations, we all need to recruit. So I think recruitment is a good starting point for any organization.
Thank you. And the next question is, what sort of questions would you ask in staff surveys and pulse surveys?
Okay, yeah. So in our staff surveys, there are certain questions. I mean, we always start with questions such as, the relationship between managers and the staff. So that's, you start with those sort of general questions, and then you could also have, questions around employees having things like one-to-one, the way that they're managed and whether they understand their objectives on a day-to-day basis. But in terms of inclusion questions as well, you could also ask whether the employees consider that your organization is inclusive, whether they receive communications from senior leaders that really demonstrates that the organization is inclusive, whether the organization is gathering and collecting data, such as data that the Law Society organizes. But really, it's giving the employees the opportunity to say what they think about you as an organization and which areas can you improve, whether it's from communication to management style to leadership. And also, we can ask about the sort of EDI initiatives that they probably have read in other organizations that they would like us to introduce in our organization. So we always have the open-ended question just to ask people their suggestions about what can we do as an organization, to keep you here, to make you more comfortable, etc. So yes, our staff surveys are quite long, so we have more than 25 questions, but they will be in different categories, like I said, from communications, leadership, and inclusion questions. So I hope that helps.
And then the next questions are more sort of statements or opinions rather than questions. Okay. Jess has said that buildings are important in equality and diversity. Honest Manor was more accessible for wheelchairs than Holiday Inn. And she's also said, we had a lot of complaints before lockdown, before events at the top of pubs, when people can't access the top of the building, when events were upstairs. This affects many different societies. And I think, I think she's making the point that, it's wider than just what we do on paper. I guess that we have to think about our buildings and about our events and making them more inclusive. Do you have any thoughts on that or comments?
Yes, absolutely. And I just wonder if, listeners are aware of the Bristol Equality Network. So the Bristol Equality Network, Bristol City Council and partner organisations set that up a couple of years ago, and I think we launched that in October 2019, but it was very much of a community initiative. So although Bristol City Council was part of it, it was about 30 or so organisations that actually came up with some standards and the Bristol Equality Standards. So that's a really good one to look at, because I attend that meeting on a, I think, bi-monthly basis, and we really looked at accessibility across the city, and we've mapped it, because these issues about accessibility to certain buildings, people have mentioned time and again. So if you could get in touch with the Bristol Equality Network, I know that there is some ongoing work to make us a really more accessible city. But I just wanted to make that point that it has been considered a great detail, and any organisation can become a member of the Bristol Equality Network. And I think at the moment we've got over 300 members. So if you haven't heard of it, please have a look at the website.
Thank you. And then just moving on to one of the questions that was raised before the session. Question was raised: why should diversity not be sidelined because of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's a good, really good question. And I think I'll go back to even going back to the basics about diversity of thought and the research that's already been done by McKinsey and other research as well. All this research shows that there is a value in considering different multiple perspectives, and that actually leads to better decision making, because there's an expression that you just don't know what you don't know. And I'll go back and refer you once again to Matthew Said's book about diverse thinking, and everything from the CIA to different corporations. We don't know what we don't know, and the value of diversity is about getting that multiple perspectives from different aspects of your business, so that you're better informed as an organization. You can make better decisions. So I think that the points that we're trying to make in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion is never really going to go away, because there is a need for it. And I know that with COVID-19, with organizations being really busy and being stretched, that there is that sort of risk that people might say, okay, EDI is not as important. But what I would say is that it is even more important, because we've seen that COVID-19, the massive social, economic, the consequences of all that, and how really expensive it is to ignore diversity. And for me, I think that continuing to pursue this EDI agenda really, it saves money, and for organizations, it makes organizations more competitive. It makes organizations innovate better and make better decisions. So I think those are the sort of points that we do need to continue making, because this is not going to go away, and we'll all be able to function better as organizations. And then also in the private sector, I mean, I come from a public sector background, so I guess I'll be talking about value for money rather than making a profit. But in organizations that are profit-making organizations and businesses, organizations that are diverse can expect profits to increase by up to a third, like 33%. And that research has been done by McKinsey time and time again. And it's worth looking at it and looking at the benefits for your business, whether you're profit making or public sector. There are benefits of pursuing this agenda.
Right. We've had a few questions about D&I calendar. And so Claire's asked a couple of questions around the ED&I calendar and using it in a firm. And it basically is, how best do we use an ED&I calendar within a firm? And should we highlight certain events each month at the risk of leaving some people out, or is having a copy on the internet enough?
Yeah. So I mean, different organizations approach it differently. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, so CIPD, and annually, on an annual basis, they do send us their mega list of D&I events. I'm sure it's more than 24. So there's no way that an organization can possibly celebrate all of those. So what we've done in the two organizations I've worked for on EDI matters is we've got staff networks, and we normally liaise with the staff networks and ask them to select maybe a couple for each network. So the BAME network could have a couple, the LGBT group may volunteer a couple. So what we tend to have is about 8 dates that we highlight. If there's a particular event and there's somebody in the organization that celebrates and wants to let the rest of the organization know, they can write into our comms team and they can highlight that event, and they can even write a blog themselves about it. But the corporate calendar is really about having an agreed set of dates that the organization says, okay, corporately, we will put this in the calendar, and whether it's Black History Month or International Day for Women, we will sort of lead on that. But we're not saying that we're going to exclude other dates. If people do want to highlight, do let us know, and we can get maybe somebody in the leadership team can talk about it in one of their blogs. That's okay, by the way, this group is also celebrating this. So we always find a way to include it. So what I'll say is, make sure that, you're telling people that, look, we're not excluding any other events by saying that these are the ones that we will ensure that we take a lead on. If you've got any more, get in touch with comms, and we're willing to consider it. But I think it's a good question, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I'll just add to that as well, because we do a lot of work on that. So yeah, so we have a main calendar, and the firm highlights particular ones through the year as a corporate, and then the staff networks lead on other ones. And so and the way they do that is we have like themed newsletters. So if there's a particular thing going on in a particular month, we do a theme and we share, you know, like so for like Diwali, we shared recipes, we shared stories and things for kids to learn about it, and educational pieces. And that was the theme of that newsletter that the staff network put together. And then we also do like I said, blogs, and then for a particular month, although we might not have an event for something, we might have just shared a blog on the internet to mark the occasion as such, without it being a firm-wide initiative type thing. So
excellent, great. Yeah.
I don't think there are any more open questions, but if anyone wants to do a really last-minute question, otherwise I think there's nothing more for me to say than thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and the presentation, and thank you everyone else for joining us today.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
And thanks, Coralie. Okay.
Thank you. Oh wait, I think we've got one more question.
We've got one more question.
No, just a thank you. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you. And thank you. Bye-bye.